When the emperor was out of his carriage, I gave it into safe hands and tried to follow his majesty, but I had to give up the attempt. It was not possible to force my way. Without losing any time, I went up the staircase to the pavilion of Flora, and I arrived more easily in the salon of the under officers, and then went into that of the high officers, where the emperor was at table with some gentlemen, among whom were the Grand Marshal, the Duke of Vicenza, perhaps General Giraud. Around stood chamberlains, equerries, generals, colonels, and many other people, both civil and military. The dinner was served as though the emperor had not left the Tuileries. None of the persons whose duty it was to serve was absent. The controller, Monsieur Colin, the major domo, Duna, the carrier, the ushers, the valets attached to the apartments of footmen, all were at their posts. Only different was that most of them were in civilian dress. During his repast, the emperor talked with one or another of those who surrounded him, often talking with them all, telling them what had happened during his journey from the island of Helvetii. When dinner was finished, he rose from table, bowed to all those present, and passed into the salon, accompanied by the Grand Marshal, the Grand Equerry, and some other persons with whom he was intimate. Soon afterwards, the crowd which had filled the salons and the staircase had dispersed. Calm reigned in the interior of the palace, as in the past. I will not tell the reception which the emperor met with in Paris on the part of the people. It was the same as those at Grenoble, at Lyon, and as in all the city and villages throughout which he had passed. The history of ancient modern times offers nothing so extraordinary, so marvelous as the events which folded themselves in so considerable a space of time. It was one of the admirable parts of the great reign of Napoleon. The emperor did not remain long in the Tuileries. He went to live at the Elysee. There he had more liberty and he could walk. Exercise was necessary to take his mind off his heavy load of work. He worked a great deal during the whole time that he occupied this residence. He rose habitually towards 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and went into his study, which he did not leave till about 7 or half past. Sometimes he would go back to bed and rest for a half hour. Then he would dress and go to his levee, which was at 9 o'clock. After that, he would breakfast. I never saw him so active. This could not help being so, since he had to reorganize everything. He felt the necessity, the importance of having everything pass through his hands and before his eyes. It was absolutely imperative that everything should be done quickly. He had no time to lose. The army especially needed all his attention, his watching, his care. The disaster of 1814, the ease with which the Bourbons had yielded to the exactions of the Allies, all had impoverished the resources of France to such a point that nothing less than the prodigious genius of the Emperor could produce favorable results with the scattered fragments which the Restoration had forgotten to destroy, to supply what was lacking. If the 100 Days are conspicuous because of the unheard of misfortunes which overturned France, they are also remarkable for the marvelous and supernatural power which the emperor displayed at so critical a juncture. He was opposed by all parties and hindered in his progress at every step by the crowd of plotters of every sort, wrapped in royalist or republican cloaks, all directed by his superannuated prejudices or personal interest. It was a difficult task, but the emperor would have accomplished it if it had not been for the many blunders which his generals committed in the Waterloo campaign. Chapter 7, Waterloo. When the emperor had made all his arrangements for the campaign and the guard had started several days before, he left the Elysee on June 12th. At 2 or 3 in the morning to go to the army. The Grand Marshal was with him. It was I who rode on the box of his carriage. He breakfasted at Soissons, slept at Lyon. The next day, the 13th, at Avesnes, the 14th at Beaumont, and the 15th at Charleroi. He was received with enthusiasm everywhere. The 16th, the Battle of Ligny took place. During the entire afternoon, the emperor remained near a mill situated on a little hill, from which we could see the whole of the enemy's right. The telescopes were constantly turned in this direction. They thought every moment that they saw the arrival of Count d'Erlon's troops, which was patiently expected. It was learned afterwards that it had lost its way. Before the emperor had come to take his place by the mill, there was a group of young staff officers a little way off, among them some orderly officers. They were laughing boisterously and jesting noisily about the different incidents which were happening a short distance before them in a fight between some Prussians and Frenchmen. The emperor, who heard the noise that these officers made, from time to time cast glances towards them, which indicated disgust and irritation. Finally annoyed and exasperated by so much gaiety, he said, looking with severity at the one who was laughing and talking loudest, "Monsieur, one ought not to laugh or jest when so many brave men are cutting one another's throats before our eyes." At nightfall, the emperor approached the village of Ligny. The artillery of the guard had been and still was firing heavily at the other side of the ravine, occupied by the Prussian army, when the head of the column of cuirassiers appeared. At the same moment, this brave troop plunged into the lane which divides the village in two, crossed the ravine, and fell upon the enemy. It had to follow before the emperor at a gallop. These gallant soldiers, whose squadrons followed one another rapidly, were so full of enthusiasm that they cried at the top of their lungs, "Vive l'Empereur!" which was heard far off. Spare your horses, the emperor never stopped telling them. You will need them later." But cuirassiers, paying no attention to the words which they heard, although they were repeated by Marshal Soult, still followed those who had preceded them. This march past the emperor, which took place to the light of cannon and accompanied by the roar, was a magnificent spectacle. Brave cuirassiers, I still seem to see you brandishing your swords and rushing to the combat. How splendid you were!